At the same time, I think there's a relationship going on here between what the words are saying and what the music is portraying. And like I said earlier, music are what thoughts send. Okay? So eventually, this is what I have come up with, and I'm not going to go through a whole lot of theory with you about how I get here. The only thing I'm going to go talk about is this Pythagorean number. These are over here, and I'm going to show you this in a minute. This is the notes that I get out of Numbers chapter 7. This is out of Joseph Julio's, what he shared. And then you take those notes over to these letters, and this is out of Psalm 119. Psalm 119 is an acrostic psalm, which means that every 8 verses, the first letter of the first word of each verse is the letter Aleph, and then you go to the next 8 verses, and the first letter of the first word of each of those is the letter Bet, and then all the way through the Aleph Bet. And so Psalm 119 is the key for us to be able to combine what note goes to what letters. And part of how we do that is we use Pythagorean math. I'm not taking you back to math class, but Pythagoras, actually interestingly, Pythagoras, he comes around 300 to 400 BC area. And he, at that time, was stating that music was better for healing sickness than medicines. So they were even catching it back then. So I've heard several people referring to the ancient wisdom that we're beginning to rediscover. Well, here we are once again. In music, we have the ancient wisdom that was understood to be healing, even way back in the BC, before era. So he developed a system of math called Pythagorean math, and he was also a musician. And so verse 9, we have, so what we do is we take, so verse 8 is 1 plus 7, it starts out for every 8 verses, so 9 stays at 9 because it's a single digit, but the third one, the Gimel, starts with verse 17, which is 1 plus 7 equals 8. And so you keep working things out, keep adding and adding until you get down to a single digit. And so like the number 19 is 1 plus 9, but that's 10, which is 1 plus 0, which is 1, is what you end up with. And so when you take those numbers, those single-digit numbers, and bring them across to the letters, then that's what I'm working with today. So it's I remember when Chilakaku, who's kind of one of the proponents of string theory, he said if we want to, he's definitely not, he said, I don't believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but if you want to know God, then you got to know mathematics. And because everything is so mathematically arranged. I get another question a lot because I talk about 4/4/4 tuning, and some of you have already asked me about that, and I'll explain that in a minute. But there's another school that's going, well, what about the 4/3/2 tuning? And actually, my feeling is that they're both have their place because 4/3/2 is based on the angles of the different polygons, different geometric figures, as well as are you familiar with the golden mean? How many of you know what that's about? The spiral of a shell, or the spiral of a galaxy, or the spiral of our DNA strands. All of them follow the same exact mathematical equation, which is called the golden mean. And so all of that is related to the 4/3/2. What I'm going to show you is why I think 4/4/4 has its place. So I would call the 4/3/2 the natural world, or the world of creation, of what we observe in the natural world. What I'm going to show you about 4/4/4 is that I believe it's associated more with the spiritual side of things, the spiritual world, because it comes out of the book of Numbers, chapter 7. One little sidebar here. You all are familiar with Emoto's work with the water crystals, okay? And the 528 actually being able to restructure the water into the perfect, he would take sewer water that would be all deformed and everything, he would put 528 frequency through it for a few hours, and then he would refreeze it and you would get the perfect snowflake like this. So we know that 528 has a is very capable of restructuring water. Well, that's really important because I am at least 75 to 80% water. Most of me is water. Most of you is water. So if that's what happens to water with 528, what do you think is going to happen to me with 528? And as I began to understand these things, I began to be able to show me why I was seeing what I was seeing with patients that I was working with the hemodialysis. The frequency was actually restructuring them. It was actually, I have this, have you ever taken apart the word disease? It's dis-ease, okay? So if you take the dis out of the ease, you have ease, okay? So if you restructure our water, maybe we come out of dis-ease and we go back to ease, okay? So maybe let's just kind of put it there. So, let's see. Okay, this is time. I'm going to play this one, and then we'll go into Numbers chapter 7. I think I rearranged my slides, but let's go ahead and go with this one. And I heard, I'm trying to remember your name, sir, that was up on the panel, but he had mentioned Psalm 51. Yes, and Psalm 51 is interesting because David screwed up really bad. He not only committed adultery, but he killed her husband so nobody would find out, but everybody found out. So, so in the process of it, the prophet came to him and told him the story about this poor guy that had just one little lamb, and a rich guy right next to him had a whole flock, but the rich guy had a visitor come. He didn't want to take anything out of his flock, so he said, well, I'm going to take his lamb. And David said, where is he? We're going to do justice. And he said, well, you're the man. And the thing about David was he didn't try to push it off on somebody else and blame somebody else. He owned it. He said, that was me. Yeah, you're right. And it's time for me to make things right. And part of his making things right was Psalm 51. He wrote this psalm very shortly afterwards. In the middle of it, verse 10, he says, create in me a clean heart. Now, going to the Hebrew language of this is really interesting because the word create is bara, B-A-R-A, in our spelling. And the first place you see that in the scriptures is Genesis 1:1, the very first verse of the scripture, where it says, in the beginning, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, God created, bara, the heavens and the earth. David essentially is saying that same power you use to bring everything that we see today into existence, I'm asking you to use that power to clean me up, to give me, essentially he's asking for a heart transplant, is what he's asking for. So that he knows that he can't depend on himself in the state that he's in. He has to, we're talking a lot about elevating our state. This is what David's doing here. He's asking his Heavenly Father to help him elevate his state, to not be blaming anybody else, but to take ownership and to move up and forward. That's what he's asking his Father. So let me play that for you as well. this is Numbers chapter 7. This is where the rest of the notes come from. This is basically Joseph Julio's work. It's interesting, I got a call from Dr. Horowitz one day, and he asked me if he could start putting some of my CDs in his shop online, and I said, sure. He said, we knew that there was music in, Joseph got the notes and everything, but he said, we didn't know how to make music out of it. You made music out of it. Actually, in fact, my wife wanted me to make an announcement for you. We are only going to be here tonight, so if you did want to get CDs, tonight's the only time they can get them. My grandson is graduating in Poulsbo, Washington next weekend, and we've got to drive from here to there. so we're going to get on the road. So anyway, I just wanted you to know that, so if you did want CDs there. But you can order them online too, so anyway. So here we are. I color-coded these just to help them stand out. But doing that Pythagorean math again, you see that we get these different numbers. And what's happening here, and I'll explain this to you, in Hebrew, if something repeats twice, like if you say shalom, shalom, that means a whole lot more than if you just say shalom, okay? Because they call it a speed bump. The scholar guys, the brainy guys, they go like, oh wait, we need to slow down and look around here because there's something else we need to understand. So when you see a 2 repeat, that's significant. Well, here we're going to see a 12 repeat. And then we're going to see another 4 repeat, okay? So here's what we have. Every 6 verses, up until verse 12, Moses has just set up the tabernacle, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute too, because the next song I'm going to do comes out of that. He's just set it up. God said, let them make me a sanctuary so that I can dwell among them. God's always wanted, however you think God is, about who he is, or the energy, or whatever, it's all about being with us, in us, part of it, all of that, okay? And so I like to consider him a very personal, someone I can appeal to for wisdom and strength and all of those things. And I think we all, in our ways, do that. I know there's different disciplines represented tonight, and I don't want to try to represent a dogma or anything like that. I just know that we all understand that we're not in this alone. Can I say it that way? Is that the best way to say it? We're in it together, and we also have something that's bigger than us helping us out as well, right? Okay? Can we just say it that way maybe? So, every 6 verses from starting with verse 12 is a dedication gift that's being brought to this new sanctuary that's just been set up. And so it says, on the first day, so-and-so from the tribe of Judah, and it says he brings these gifts. And then on the second day, Nathaniel, I guess it is, from the tribe of Issachar, he brings these gifts. But the only thing is, they're the exact same thing. It's the exact same words. And the third day, the exact same thing. And all the way 12 times, 6 verses are repeated exactly. Now, I know that if I was in high school, which I was a long time ago, and I handed in an English paper like that, I would have red marks all over it. The teacher would say, you can't say the same thing 12 times and expect to get your word count up and let me get you by with that, okay? That's not going to happen. You go get some original material and get back to me, all right? And then you might get a D. Okay. So I believe that God wrote these words for us to have instruction about how to have a great, blessed life. He said, I wrote these things down for you to follow so you have blessing and not cursing. You have life and not death. Those are pretty interesting options that we can choose. So if he wrote that, he's not a very good Hebrew writer. Okay? I mean, that's kind of what I say that with tongue in cheek, because obviously I think he knows pretty well how to write, and so there must be a good reason why he wrote it this way. And so that leads us to these numbers. So 1 plus 2 is 3. And the second day, 1 plus 8 is 9. And then on the third day, 2 plus 4 is 6. And then you go to the second verse of that first day, you get the 4, 1, 7, the 5, 2, 8, the 6, 3, 9, the 7, 4, 1, and the 8, 5, 2. Does anybody know what those numbers might represent? Solfeggio frequencies? Yeah. So here we are, solfeggio frequencies showing up 3,500 years ago. Okay? And it has to do with the tabernacle. And that's why I like to, I don't mind calling them solfeggio frequencies. Solfeggio actually means name, they have names. I kind of like to call them tabernacle frequencies as well, kind of to add another tag onto, because it's right there, tucked up right next to the building of the sanctuary and the dedication. So that's repeated 4 times. Somebody's going to flip through these. I just did it 4 times just so you could see that it repeats 4 times. So those numbers repeat 4 times, and those verses repeat 12 times. So you have a very interesting set of repeats going on. And so here's the solfeggio frequencies laid out here. Interestingly enough, one other, for you musicians that are wondering how do we apply these solfeggio frequencies, a friend of mine and myself up in Canada, she had a set of tuning forks, solfeggio tuning forks, and we started trying to play music with them, and it just wasn't working. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. It sounds weird. So one of the ideas we had was to play one of the tunes and then come to the part and find out what key was harmonic with that tune. And what we found was that each one of those frequencies had a key that corresponded to it, that was harmonically tuned to that tone. So that's really what you have. And so that brings me to this whole 444 business, is that the 528, when you take the Yod He Vav He, which is God's name, as it's written in the scriptures there, he says, you'll call my name Yod He Vav He. When you put that into the notes, it ends up being the C chord or the 528 frequency. And I just have this kind of thought here, and I'll share it with you. You don't have to agree with me or not, but I don't think remember I already went back to Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created, and the next verse says, and he said, let there be light. Well, I don't think he said it. I think he sang it in 528 frequency. Because interestingly enough, when we get to the tabernacle, down here, the menorah, which is the light, is 528 frequency. Interestingly enough, the rainbow, the Hebrew word for rainbow, also turns out to be 528 frequency. And then when we get to the New Testament, when Yeshua, Jesus says, I am the light of the world. And so he's also identifying, and he also said he was God. So there you are. In fact, they tried to stone him when he said he was God, because they said, you can't say you're God. And he said, well, I am. So there we are. We have the menorah being the 528, and we have Yod He Vav He being the 528. And so what my theory is, this is my personal theory, is that he sang it, and by doing that, he's putting it's like he's putting it, an artist, every time they make a painting, they go, oh, I think I'm going to sign my name down here. So that way people will know that I did it, right? Well, I think our Heavenly Father, is what I like to call him, used 528 to make his signature on everything. He used it for water, he used it for light, he used it for all of the life-sustaining things. Just think where we would be if we didn't have light and if we didn't have water. We wouldn't be up the creek without a paddle. But we would be in trouble. Okay. So one day, I'm close on time here, so I'll try to wind it up here. One day, my wife came to me, she said, you know, the 6 notes you get out of the Numbers chapter 7, have you ever thought about the idea that there's 6 pieces of furniture? And go back to that, somewhere. Oh, there we go. So, there's 6 pieces of furniture in that sanctuary tabernacle, and there's 6 frequencies. Do you think there's a combination, or some kind of coordination between the 2 of them? And I thought, well, that's an interesting idea. And so she said, then you know that you do the Psalms, you get the chord progressions. What if you went back and you got the chord progressions out of the description of each of those pieces of furniture? And I said, well, let me do that. It took me several days to do it, but what came out was very interesting. If you notice each piece of furniture, in an act of worship back then, what would happen was they would come into the proper, and the first thing they would meet would be the brazen altar here, where the sacrifice was made. And that is the lowest frequency, 396. The next thing you would do would be to go to wash your hands. The priest would wash their hands before they went inside, and that's the next frequency, 417. The next thing would happen would be they would go to the light, the menorah, and they would inspect to make sure they were clean before they did anything else. So that's the next frequency. Are you seeing a pattern here? Mm-hmm. The next one is the table of showbread, where there was bread and also there were wine for libations. That's the next one. Then there was the altar of incense, which was just before going into the Holy of Holies, and that was the 741. And finally, the Holy of Holies, where it says that there was a kind of a cloud there, right in that area, that was what's called the Shekinah presence, which was the presence of God Himself. And so, can you see that there's this progression from low frequency to high frequency? And so, this is my theory once again, and you don't have to agree with me, but I believe that because this is all, we're starting to understand, there's a lot being said about solfeggio frequencies, about chakras, about all of these different things that are very interestingly connected. And here we have this worship process that was going on, that's coming, let them make me a sanctuary that I may come, may dwell among them. So bringing us, it's like there's this path that we follow to come in, and there's no tabernacle anymore, there's no temple anymore, there's all kinds of books been written about where's the Ark of the Covenant, Raiders of the Lost Ark and all that. But in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul said, what, don't you know that you are the temple? And this is where I think it gets really interesting. Because we were talking earlier about how we raise ourselves up into higher forms of consciousness, that we come into better capacities, better understandings. Is this possibly how we do that? Or a way to do that? I'm not presenting it as the only way. But does this have to do with, like I say, tuning ourselves up like we tune an instrument? I believe myself, Psalm 139, I like the Psalms. It says that when I was in darkness, being created in my mother's womb, before my forms were yet formed, my parts were yet formed, He was knitting me together, is the wording used there. And it's why I said earlier, I think none of you are here by accident, that every one of you has a purpose, that each one of you has been brought to the kingdom for such a time as this. So, if that's true, then isn't it going to be important that we understand how to get tuned up so that we can be at our optimum, so that we can bring ourselves into these higher levels, these greater potentials, that we can be the co-creators of the world that we want to see. Isn't that really what this is all about? So I don't want to put religious spins on things, because I consider myself not religious. I consider myself to be in a relationship. In a a relationship with you and me, and with him and me, and or her, whatever, however you want to say that. But anyway, okay, very good. So let me just play. This is what the incense altar sounds like, and I'll just have a couple comments following that. I'm down to 10 minutes here, so. These levers allow me to, they're kind of like the black keys on the piano. They allow me to go into different keys. That's another interesting thing. I have one of my CDs out there, it's called The Keys of David, in the book of Isaiah 22, verse 22, it says, interesting number as well, it says, I will place on his shoulder the keys of David, and what he opens no man can shut, and what he shuts no man can open. And a lot of people think of keys as like something you open your door with. But as a musician, I think of keys as, I'm going to be playing in the key of A major. So was this maybe talking about more about the frequencies? Just a possibility. Once again, I'm not presenting myself as the total authority on everything. I'm just presenting ideas for you to consider.